Alrighty, welcome back to another episode of the Wizard Factory podcast, where you subscribe for weekly videos exploring deeper knowledge of the universe and yourself. My name is Logan Hart.
And I'm Brian Easterday.
Today we're going to be discussing our first Norse myth. Obviously, mythology in general is a new territory that we're stepping into. Those of you who've been following the channel know that we just did a 3-part breakdown of the Dark Crystal film, and right before that we did an episode called The Meaning of Myth, where we really kind of laid the groundwork, the foundation for the context that we'd be coming from as we begin stepping into breaking down modern day myths, i.e. movies, stories, TV series, things like that, as well as ancient or traditional myths, because essentially the point is all the same. The benefits are all the same. It's just different forms. So this being our first one, actually exploring a traditional Norse myth, the Death of Baldur. So what I'm going to do is just do a quick run through of the basic premise for those of you who are not familiar with the story, and then we'll go back through and start kind of unpacking things at a more in-depth level. So before I begin, just keep in mind a disclaimer here that this is a version of the story. There's a lot of room for error and discrepancy regarding these myths, particularly from this era, because this was well into the Christian age. People who were translating from the original Icelandic and other, High German and Norse dialects, they didn't give it. There's so many reasons that they didn't give it its due diligence, from their mindset of Christianity, their poor grasp of the culture and the traditions and all those kind of things. So just keep that in mind. There may be things that you disagree with about this, and this is just kind of our take, our version of it. And honestly, if you feel that we missed something or we got something wrong, feel free to let us know. Just comment down below and we'd love to have a conversation about it. If you enjoy content like this and you want to help support the channel, please like the video. Helps our channel grow, and don't forget to subscribe. Weekly videos. So let's get into this, the story of Baldur, the death of Baldur. So Baldur was the son of Odin and Frigg, and he was the pure embodiment of goodness, light, joy, victory, that sort of thing. And all the other gods loved Baldur. And Baldur began being plagued by these bad dreams about his death. And after so long, he couldn't take it anymore. So he went and told the Aesir, the other gods, that he was having these dreams. And this was very troubling. They all loved him so much, and was troubling more than others to Odin, because Odin already knew that by being told by Osiris that the death of Baldur would be the first stage in the beginning of Ragnarok. So Frigg was very disturbed by this as well, and then she went and told all the other living things, living and otherwise, all the things in the world, all 9 worlds, to not harm Baldur. She asked the animals, the plants, the trees, the other humans, the other gods, the dwarves, the stones, the elements, everything, except for one thing, mistletoe. And this was one of those things that there was many different reasonings behind. Some say that she just had an oversight, forgot about mistletoe. But Brian and me discussed that we feel that it was something about the youth of the mistletoe plant, and that it wouldn't be a threat. It was a harmless plant. Obviously, this isn't logical. Grass is harmless too, but it's mythology. It's symbolic. It's not meant to always be 100% logical. So the other gods start testing this promise of all of the beings to not harm Baldur. So they begin throwing rocks and shooting arrows and striking Baldur with these different objects and weapons, and nothing was harming him. They would just bounce off, disintegrate, and it became almost a sport. They were having fun and making a game out of this. So Loki sees this happening, and he disguises himself as a woman and goes to Frigg, and they begin having drinks. And as she's getting more inebriated, Loki starts asking more questions and says, "So is it true that Baldur cannot be harmed by anything?" And she said, "Yes, that's true, except for one thing, the mistletoe." And so without hesitation, Loki goes and finds the nearest mistletoe and crafts an arrow out of this branch. And he goes and finds the blind god by the name of Hod, and who was not participating in these games. And Loki asked him, "Why are you not joining in with the other gods?" And he said, "Well, I don't have any weapons, and I can't see where he is anyways to strike a winning blow." So Loki says, "Well, I will guide your hand and show you where he is." And he gives him the mistletoe arrow, to which he sends flying, and it strikes Baldur, and he dies instantly on the spot. He just collapses right there. And obviously all the gods were very shocked and horrified by this. They loved him so much, and they started weeping. And obviously in this mythology, the dead would then go to Helheim to work with Hela, and in that Helheim is Hela's domain. So Frigg then please, will someone please travel to Hell to bargain for the life of Baldur, allow him to be returned to us because we love him so. And Hermod, who is another son of Odin, Baldur's brother, he volunteers to ride to Hell. Odin provides Sleipnir for him to ride to Hell, and he begins traveling immediately. And he goes all the way to the gates of Hell and stands before Mother Hela herself and asking, "Can we take Baldur back with us?" And Hel says, "If all other beings will grieve him, then Baldur can be released, but only if all other beings are grieving for Baldur." So he immediately rides back, tells the other gods, and tells them the situation, and they all start grieving, all but one, who was a giantess, I should say, female giant by the name of Tok, which translates to thanks or gratitude, which is important. We'll begin to unpack the meanings behind things later on. But this giantess Tok said that she would not grieve for Baldur. And it turns out that this giantess Tok was actually Loki in disguise. So Loki was to be punished, but so was Hod, because Loki was giving the orders, but Tok was, of course, the one who actually took the action and flung the arrow that killed Baldur. So Baldur actually remained in Helheim until the end of Ragnarok, which is all kind of that cycle, that renewal sort of aspect, and then returns with Hod to rule in the next age together. So that's the general story. There are other aspects of it that I left out, but these are kind of just the main pieces of it that play into the overall narrative that we were going to get in here today. So without further hesitation, Brian, would you like to a chance to speak on these things?
Sure, yeah. So if you wanted kind of a general summary of the theme behind this whole mythology, it's really about the soul's journey into the underworld. That death and resurrection, as we see in paganism. We've talked about a lot on the show, that it's all cyclical. There's always going to be more cycles. There's always going to be change happening. And we see in the Norse mythology that Baldur is associated with the sun, which is, the soul, as they see it. So we see this in the beginning of the myth, understanding Baldur. He's this very, joyous god. So he's a god that everybody loves him. Everybody appreciates him. to me, when you're looking at that, you really see that all beings appreciate the soul, you know, but at the same time, as we see later on in the stories it develops, you know, they take it for granted too, which, you know, leads to lessons having to be learned. But I think it's very, very interesting that it's through his dreams he starts, being worried that he's going to die, you know. So then obviously, you know, they send out the messengers, and then in Helheim, you know, they in some of the versions of the myth you see they see that they're preparing a feast, you know, and they ask who it's for, you know. They say, well, you know, it's going to be for Baldur. This is who we're expecting. So, like you said, that really then had Odin and Frigg worried, not only for the death of their son, but that being, you know, the first sign of, or the first omen, that Ragnarok was to begin. So,
would you like to give a little bit more context on the concept of Ragnarok, what that actually represents?
yeah, that's something that I think we could do a whole episode just on that, obviously. But essentially, Ragnarok in the Norse mythology is this kind of apocalyptic time or of transformation. You know, when, you know, the gods do battle and end up, you know, ultimately, you know, they all destroy each other. You know, and that's what's interesting in paganism. You know, the gods aren't necessarily always eternal. Like, they do die, they do go through changes and shifts, and Ragnarok is like a planetary kind of event and shift. So I think that's kind of for a good little short understanding of it without getting into it too much.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's an omen of, you know, Baldur dying, the soul dying is an omen of that major transformation, you know, coming, that Ragnarok. So, you know, if we
end
wanted
of an age,
to,
essentially.
yeah, you know, you could look at it, you know, like an alchemical, you know, process, you know, in that sense.
The
So
transformation, like a butterfly kind of.
yeah, one, I think it's very, very interesting that, you know, with Baldur dying, and then, you know, we see that he goes to Helheim, going to the underworld, really in lot, and then that is the beginning omen for this phase of major transformation, you know, for, you know, in all the beings of the nine worlds. So that's really how it is in our lives sometimes too. You know, when our soul has to go into that journey into the underworld, there's like a death we experience that then leads to like major transformation and change and things. So these are like a lot of the underlying themes and tones that we're dealing with in this mythology.
Which I'd like to also kind of add to this theme of the sun going on journeys. Like, it's as above, so below, law of correspondence. And you see this same kind of thing specifically with the sun in, say, Egyptian mythology, with Horus representing the sun, and then Set was the brother of Horus, and they always did battle, and then Horus would die and go to the underworld. The sun would go to the dark side. You see, it's all representative. That's why the sun sets, because Set was the lord of the underworld. The sun goes under. So this same kind of thing could be seen here, of like the brilliance of the sun and everyone basking in that, and then the sun is put to death. Even similar to the Jesus story, the Son of God dies and then is reborn, resurrected. It's that sort of process of transformation, essentially.
Yeah, you know, so, and then, you know, I think it's very, you know, it's interesting to note then that Frigg, who is this very the motherly kind of goddess, you know, she has that feminine energy, that ability to, you know, speak to all the different creatures, all the different plants and things. So then you see her going out just like a mother would if she thought, you know, something was going to harm her child, like, you know, asking like, please don't harm my child, please don't harm Baldur, you know. But then it comes to mistletoe, and then, like said, in some of the versions of the myth, it's she doesn't ask mistletoe for the promise because she sees it as like too young or too innocent to do harm, to worry about, which is also a very kind of like motherly perspective in the sense, you know, she's this very kind of this earthy, kind of mother. She's like, it's all the creatures, it's all the things that she gives this kind of attention to. Um,
Mm.
I
In
think
fact,
that's a very interesting thing.
sure, the combination of the mistletoe being the sort of Achilles heel to Baldur, representing innocence, and then the one who actually sent the mistletoe flying in arrow form was a blind giant. So you have innocence and then ignorance, because the blind giant to me represents ignorance of not seeing, not being aware. And notice, it was Loki's idea. He directed, he coordinated the event, but it was by Hod's hand that Baldur fell, by actually sending the arrow flying. So that innocence and then ignorance are at play, but you still see the moral of the story is that those didn't stop it from happening. They didn't excuse the responsibility for what occurred simply because innocence and ignorance, those were still at play, and the result was still there. That's why Loki was punished for causing it or concocting the event, but so was Hode punished as well for being the one that actually did it. So you can kind of see this order giver, order follower dynamic at play of, say, for example, in our world, politicians write laws, police and military go and do the actual work to create, to manifest those orders, those dictates in reality, even when that causes harm to other people. So who's more responsible? Well, I'd say the ones who are actually doing it, but that also doesn't excuse the order givers as well from their part.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to say something with mistletoe. I think it's interesting that there's Frigg talks to everything, and then except for one thing, it's really, and like you compared it to an Achilles heel. I think that is a good way to look at it. It's a way of reminding us that there's always going to be that one thing that you didn't think, that there could always be that one thing that you just didn't plan on, biting you in the ass, so to speak, and that it ends up doing that.
By Loki, no less, that's what
who
he
is the
embodies.
trickster that plays on things
He's
like that.
going to call out, he's going to identify and highlight and pinpoint that thing. That's kind of the area for growth, if we're looking at that way. You could be a very advanced person, but just that little imperfection is where your focus should be, because you're transmuting that at all times.
Yes, so then the reason they're having this other party in the hall after is because Frigg has now, they now believe Baldur's safe. So then, they go back into the hall, and they're in there drinking and playing games, and then because they now feel like that Baldur is safe, and they think what they were afraid of, they don't think is going to happen now. So then all of a sudden they then kind of become ignorant, in the sense that they really stop appreciating Baldur. They then start making a mockery or a joke of him by just throwing things at him, or shooting arrows at him, and even though it wasn't hurting Baldur or anything, it wasn't respecting him. And Loki observing this, that is what really irked Loki. Loki's this, many times, and especially in this mythology, he's portrayed as the bad guy or the devil, so to speak. But I really very firmly am of the position that that's a Christian interpretation of Loki, or people who just don't understand him. They haven't worked with that trickster energy yet. The way that works is it will play on your weaknesses on that one little area, and so you can learn through an apophatic process. Like Saturn puts pressure on you, Loki doesn't kind of do that. The trickster energy suggests things. Like I wouldn't even see him as like an order or an order giver, even, so to speak. He just suggested. Like he didn't even order Hope. He just suggested.
Well, yeah.
Like so I really see Loki as kind of the unsung hero in this myth, because he sees them not respecting Baldur, not respecting the soul. and he knows the way that have you ever heard that, like, understanding in life that you won't really appreciate things until they're gone? So this is the lesson that Loki goes to give all of the gods, all the creatures, every being that wasn't, they weren't respecting Baldur, appreciating him enough. And he goes and he finds Hod, who is blind, and in translations that I found, I see him being translated to as ignorance, so that idea that ignorance is blind. So not only did he not know, but he was just kind of foolishly willing to just trust, right. And then that's where the trickster can come in, like if that's a great idea, go ahead and do that. That's how the trickster energy teaches us. So that's exactly what Loki did. And like I said, I think that's very interesting that you think you're doing something, or you're doing it just because everybody else is doing it. You see like Hod, he wasn't participating because he didn't want to. He was participating because he didn't have, a weapon, and he said he was blind. And as soon as the opportunity was there, he went along with it. So, that maybe that can, even you could look at that as a lesson of just, being ignorant. So to the point that you just start going along with what everybody else is doing, what society is doing. And then through that, what happens? You end up killing your own soul. I think that's definitely one way you could look at that.
Right. And as you mentioned, Brian, the giantess Tok, which translates to gratitude, that is a very important component when you're translating it, like you were just saying about Loki's anger was coming from a good place of wanting to expose the disrespect that they were showing for Baldur, who they all said that they loved. The gratitude, the giantess, the gratitude was the one who said, I don't need to weep for Baldur now because I was grateful for him when he was alive.
Yes, and I think that's actually one of the keys in the story that so many people overlook, and then they portray Loki as this bad guy. Right. When he really was the one that actually appreciated Baldur most, because Loki wasn't. He was the one god that didn't. He wasn't throwing stones. He wasn't doing any of that. He just tricked someone else into doing it, and Hod was ignorant enough to go along with that, which resulted in Baldur's death. So yeah, Loki's just he's that trickster, but he's also a teacher coming from to me, I see coming from a very, I guess, honorable place in that sense that, he respected Baldur and appreciated him enough to know that, like, people would miss him when he's gone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you could also sort of look at how Baldur is the son of Odin and Frigg, which Odin is the spirit, and Frigg is love or beloved. So the soul is the creation of spirit and love bonded. And, again, like you said, Frigg has the command over nature. It's a very feminine, motherly, that Mother Earth type thing. And she only asks that out of that motherly care to protect Baldur and to keep harm from coming, which what all mothers want for their children is nothing bad to happen to them. So that's definitely very interesting. And of course, Baldur not only represents the soul, but I would say represents the perfection of the spirit of humanity. He's sort of that quintessential epitome of the ideal of human potential and what we could be when we're fully Isa, when we're fully reflecting that light of our soul.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. And I think it's interesting to note that as Odin's other son, rides Sleipnir into the underworld, and they ride there and they see Baldur, and he's sitting at the table, they're feasting. Helheim, if those of you who aren't familiar in the Norse understanding, it isn't a place, or it doesn't have to be a place of suffering or anything like that.
Punishment even.
Or punishment. It can very much be a place of celebration and feasting. if you really want to look at the purpose of Helheim, it would be a place for the soul's reflection over its experiences. So it's all up to you. That's why the ruler of Helheim, Mother Hela, as we talked about, she will appear many, or she's depicted many times as being, half a very young, beautiful woman and half a corpse. It's really, she will reflect back to you what your experience is. Like, she's that space that holds that. And Baldur is sitting there, at the high seat of honor right next to Mother Hela. So the soul is even though it's in the underworld, it's in its place of honor there. It's feasting. It's still there. So even though they're missing it, in Asgard, it's still living on in a different form. So there's still that idea of that immortal soul, and that the physical death isn't the only thing. That's just part of a phase, part of a transition.
Right. And that's kind of the curious thing about it too, is you notice when Baldur dies and all the gods are lamenting the death and they ask, can he come back from Helheim? It wasn't this energy of like, we have to save Baldur. It's because they didn't want to live without him. They missed him. They loved him in that way. It wasn't, oh, he's down there suffering, we have to help him. It's just we don't want to live without our Baldy.
Yeah. Well, and their grief, it took them having to lose that to realize that they weren't really appreciating Baldur. That grief needed to be felt, and I think that's a beautiful thing that we can see from the mythology. That I love that about the mythologies, that there's such a range of different emotions and experiences. The gods are very, very human-like. Beings in the way they are. They're not this almighty, being sitting on a throne that is, too benevolent to know what it's like to be human.
Which even that, I mean, it makes total sense if I think the universal truth of pretty much all spirituality is that this place, whatever this is, Midgard, reality, whatever the hell you want to call it, the purpose is learning, growth. This is a school. So how the fuck are you going to learn something from a perfect being?
Right.
There's no transformation. You can't hold yourself to that standard. That's one of the most harmful things, in my opinion, about the Christian mindset or Abrahamic mindset in general, is holding yourself to that standard of perfection, yet simultaneously lowering yourself because you know that you inherently cannot achieve that. How could you learn something from something that's perfect and exactly what you aren't, when you could learn from the gods that are so human and you can relate to that? You can actually take those lessons and relate to those feelings through the experience of that as well. Yeah, you may not have a situation where all your other friends are throwing arrows at your one friend who doesn't die. I mean, that's not going to literally happen, but you can extrapolate those lessons of the potential for human folly. To me, that's what kind of you can boil this one down to, is even when things are good, there's that back door, that trap door, the Achilles heel, as it were, that you might, if you're not fully in your awareness, you can lose sight of that, and that one thing could be the death of your actualization.
Yeah, well, and like I said, it's important to be able to learn from those mistakes. That's a lot different mindset to go about operating from than thinking that you have to hold yourself to this perfect standard. Understanding that the gods can make mistakes just like you can. That is a lot more relatable. It's a lot more useful for you as a human being to actually learn from. And there's all. I'm sure we've all went through experiences in our life when there was something that we really valued a lot that we didn't fully appreciate, though. Like
internet.
Right.
I mean, it's terrible, but that really is a very applicable. It's like everything's great, and then all of a sudden, boom, your Wi-Fi is down, and you don't have internet, and then suddenly you're like, oh my god, my life is, trash without this one simple thing.
Yeah, or there could be a person who lost somebody, or like your parent. Parents would be a good example. Many people don't like have a good relationship with their parents, but then all of a sudden they'll die or something, and then they don't, or something like that, where you see someone that you care about die, and then all of a sudden it makes you realize like how much you really did care about them, but you wouldn't have recognized that otherwise. Uh, so that's very important to be able to incorporate those experiences,
Right.
in life, and looking at all of them is valuable, even though they can be painful to go through.
Yeah, in fact, that even kind of brings up something for me regarding the concept of death and losing people. Is it's something so human about death, right? This idea that even people you don't like can die. I know that sounds odd, but I've I've experienced that where people that you thought was kind of annoying or something like that, um, you don't care about them in that moment. But if you heard they died like in a brutal car accident, if there's any humanity in you, you might kind of feel bad for them. And they're like, well, they were kind of a douche, but damn, they don't deserve that. Like you feel for that, that loss of like
Mm-hmm.
what could have been, or just maybe their family or something like that. It's like very big reality check. I think when you hear someone dies, it
Mm-hmm.
just kind of shocks you a little bit. It makes you think in different ways about what we
Yeah,
value in life.
yeah, and I mean that I don't think it's any accident that that is the kind of event that the mythology centers around, because that's something our ancestors would have been a lot more close to. They would have been very familiar with what the grief of losing a loved one or losing a child
Hmm.
was like. And seeing, that's a lot of emotion to be put into a mythology. So there's definitely a lot to learn from looking at it. Uh, you know, I also want, I think looking at this journey of the sun into the underworld, into like this place of reflection is very interesting. We've talked about on the Aeshalmer behind me here, before, on the Helm of All, the direction of the southwest being associated with Helheim, as well as the unconscious mind.
Mm.
So we can see this is the soul's journey, the self's journey, really into that realm of the unconscious. But it's through that experience, like that death needed to happen in order to give that experience, not only for the soul to go to its place of reflection for a time, but then it's still teaching other beings. So there's like, you see Baldur, he's on his journey, he has his experience as an individual, but yet that experience impacts all the other gods. I think that's a really a beautiful thing that we can see from this. Is it's a reminder that even though we as souls are each on like an individual journey, our experience, our interactions with the other beings impacts them, that we are also part of their lessons, and things like that. So even though our soul may be in Helheim, in the underworld, on its own journey, and it's in its own stage of reflection, uh, that can have an impact on the experience of others, and then still serve a valuable lesson for them.
Mm. Absolutely.
Well, and we see, because of this punishment, Loki ends up, strapped on a rock in the underworld with a venomous snake, dripping venom on him. But, being that Loki is a trickster, I kind of see that being the place he would like to be. If you're thinking about the underworld as the realm of the unconscious mind, that's exactly where a trickster energy would want to be. Uh, that's where all the hidden little triggers, uh, and all the traumas and the lessons that we really need to learn. That's where those are all hidden. So I think it's very interesting that at the end of this myth, he ends up down there for a time. I guess I wouldn't necessarily even see that as it's known as the punishment of Loki, but I don't necessarily see that as a punishment. Maybe that's exactly where he wanted to be. Yeah, I don't know. I always found that kind of interesting. Is that's where he ends up, because that definitely is, in my experience, where you know, if you're looking in your astrological chart, a lot of times, you know, Rahu is a really good indicator of a lot of those unconscious desires and things like that. You know, Rahu and Loki have that association together.
Nice.
Yeah, just re-summarizing on the Jotun or the giantess name, Thok, you know, and that it's gratitude and it's really Loki in disguise. I think that's a very powerful thing, because even though, you know, if all the gods had just got their way and then Baldur had just been brought back like nothing happened, the lesson wouldn't have been as impactful.
They had to feel that loss, the absence.
To know it was there, you know, and from a being that, you know, is named gratitude, like they had already appreciated Baldur, so she didn't need to weep for Baldur, you know. That's a very, very powerful thing, and it shows you the mindset of Loki and what he was really trying to do. I think that's like a pivotal point that so many people will overlook, and they'll portray Loki as, you know, a bad guy, but I don't see him like that at all. And you know, in this mythology, so definitely the person that recognized the soul's value, you know, and then, you know, obviously he knew that there's this the soul is immortal, that death is just part of it. It's not an eternal death, you know. It's just a transition into a different phase of being, you know. So
exactly.
You know, definitely a lot more awareness coming from Loki than what he's portrayed like many of the times when people speak about this myth.
Yeah. So there you have it, folks. That is the Death of Baldur, our first myth. And if you like this, you know, let us know. Perhaps suggest another myth that you would like us to cover. We'd love to hear from you. But that is going to wrap up today's exploration of this wonderful story, full of rich meaning and a good lesson, I think. So so if, again, you enjoyed this episode, please give us a thumbs up down there. Subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit that notification bell. We are doing episodes every single week, all different types of topics, and we'd love to have you as part of the channel. But I encourage you to check out our website, thewizardfactory.com. Link is also below. That's a one-stop shop for all of our packages and services. We have a lot of really cool stuff to offer. We're in the process of creating more as well. So definitely check that out. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And for those of you who haven't heard, our newest product is the Rune Divination course, where we really go in depth on not only the meaning of the runes, how to have a personal relationship with them, but how you can use them in an actual 9-world rune reading for divination, and to find really clarity and ultimately what I think is reflection. It's unlocking parts of you that you already know to be true, but just having that external confirmation, that reflection, really helps kind of solidify your own conviction and trust in yourself, and that sort of thing. It's a really valuable thing to have. So if you'd like to learn more, there's a link down below for that Rune Divination course. We are running a special on that right now, discounted, as well as it comes with a free digital download of the Phoenix package as well. So definitely check that out. Click that below. And Brian, if you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, you know, just keep in mind, we're always going to be doing more breakdowns of different myths. We have some other movies and things that we're going to be getting into here soon as well. So, you know, stay tuned for all of that.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next week. And until then, be empowered, inspired, and